Hello and welcome to the Skylines Academy Demystifying DevOps session. If you're just joining the series, our goal, as you probably know, is to answer all these questions around DevOps. Number of students getting into DevOps, infrastructure people, development people, are really trying to understand what's going on in the space. And just like previous episodes, I am joined by Shannon Kuehn, who will be co-hosting with me again. So Shannon, why don't you introduce yourself? And then if you'd be so kind as to introduce our guest, Ryan.
Sure. So I'm Shannon Kuehn. I'm a senior cloud advocate on the enterprise platforms and tools team. So we focus a lot with community outreach, talking about how to make your enterprise platforms move into Azure with ease. And prior to this role, I worked with Ryan Berry. Ryan Berry is a principal cloud solution architect on the national CSA team. So when I was trying to make sense of how Azure DevOps works in general, I leaned on Ryan quite a bit. And given what we're trying to uncover for students, I kind of thought, well, gosh, there's an awesome person I know who always has an example or two that he can walk folks through. So Ryan, thanks for joining.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and so to kick things off, just to kind of recap, we've obviously had a lot of sessions recently trying to, everything from culture, people, process, technology, all those things. I think, Ryan, to kick things off for you, we keep hearing, administrators are eager to learn more about, building DevOps pipelines. We're hearing this, everybody that's been on the previous episodes, how do they build a pipeline? And so in thinking through some of your, working examples with customers in the space, where do you start in the process of just automating like server admin tasks?
Yeah, no, that's an excellent question. It's in working with a lot of customers that that I've engaged with, the product name just by sheer nature has the word dev in it, and invariably, the infrastructure folks that tend to have to be responsible for building environments out, or in the traditional data center world, racking and stacking, installing operating systems, configuring them, all that kind of stuff. Tend to be, I don't want to say turned off entirely, but they look at it as a tool that is, perhaps more geared towards a developer and not containing capabilities that could benefit them. And I believe there are a number of features both in Azure DevOps and in GitHub that that can facilitate keeping environments consistent. We have a lot of different paths that we can maybe talk about some of those that you can use for being able to maintain some level of consistency. It's not uncommon for customers to have a huge pool of servers to be able to host a web application if it's a large public-facing site, or maybe many tiers of applications. We have app servers and web servers, and invariably there's some complexity in maintaining and deploying new versions of software to those, and also in making sure that they're all maintained in a consistent, or configured in a consistent manner. And that's where I think DevOps can really shine to help, not just with the act of building and releasing code, but taking that code forward and deploying it into various environments and configuring the servers that they sit in.
Yeah, that makes sense. And just to hit on that a little bit, somebody starting out, like what are the main features of Azure DevOps? Is it people wonder, is it a product in itself? Is it a collection of products? And, where do you kind of see the tool fitting in today?
Sure, yeah. I have a slide here. Maybe I can just share. I'll just share my entire screen because I have a whole bunch of stuff here. And just to use this as a talking point, there's a lot of, I can see my handy dandy.
Yeah, you're good. You're good.
Okay, there we go. So in a number of different capabilities here that Azure DevOps can bring to the table, including being able to help program managers or project managers establish a plan around a project, and being able to coordinate that plan about what features and functions need to be contained in a particular release. So there's capabilities as the ability to build customized dashboards on kind of what where the project is in its particular release sprint, and what features are going to be planned to be incorporated in that release sprint. So it's a lot of what I'd classify as project management type capabilities. And then you have the actual environment that the developers work in to be able to manage source code, versions of source code, the branches that they might be building applications or new bits of functionality against and being able to maybe try new capabilities without impacting, the main branch of code that is actually deployed into production. So there's some capabilities that largely facilitate that collaborative development work environment that is typical amongst developer teams. And then you have the monitor and learn capability, to be able to take feedback from releases that you've already done, and being able to do automated tests that might run against those releases, and being able to take some of that information back and incorporate it to work items that are assigned to developers to be able to build new features or functions or repair items that might be broken. And then finally, and actually I guess I went in reverse, but I realized it's number 4. The one that I was going to focus on today, which maybe I purposely saved for last, is the release space. And that's where I think there's some very powerful capabilities that exist in Azure DevOps to be able to help a operations or infrastructure team be able to facilitate taking that code that a team has built and getting it out into an environment where it can run.
Really like this slide. It's actually a very simple view of development on the left, operations pieces on the right, and
exactly
probably one of the best visualizations I've seen to really help hit it home for people.
Yeah, we're good. Just try. I like to keep things simple. So,
exactly.
One other really interesting thing, just to kind of highlight a story or an example, you can actually use, and I have customers doing this, using just the release capability without any code. And I have many examples of this. So I can give you one specific one that I'm working with a customer on right now, where they have Power BI and some Databricks jobs. So things that you wouldn't, yes, there's code associated with it, but it's report functions and some machine learning jobs that are written in Python. So I guess in that regard, there is some code element to it. But this customer needed to be able to, the team that was responsible for releasing this into an environment that their customers was using, needed to be able to do that in a controlled way and also in a consistent way. So they actually are taking these templates and actually using the release capabilities of DevOps to push those out into a production environment. And there's a whole bunch of benefits that provides. First off, now they have a controlled way to do that. So somebody has to actually say, okay, I'm ready for this particular change to go out into environment X. And some other interesting things I can talk about in the environment X when we get into the demo. And the other aspect that comes into play is that they have a bold, ambitious goal, and I encourage a lot of my customers to think about this, and not having a human have access to the production environment. So the only thing that can actually deploy or change the artifacts that are in the production environment is Azure DevOps or GitHub Actions. And that's kind of hard to sometimes get your arms around. When well, so easy to go in the portal and create a new server.
Yeah.
Yes, it is, but in a production environment, you don't want your administrators just doing that or making changes to, you have a pool of 30 web servers and changing, 10 of them and leaving 20 of them, in some other inconsistent state. So, the benefit of using some release automation allows you to control permissions, so things like usernames and passwords. The actual DevOps release pipeline is the only thing in this customer's environment. He has the ability to go out to key vaults to get those credentials, populate them in connection strings, and then push it into the production environment. So in
that use case, and so you advocate, so they would, figure out their pipeline, their release and everything out in dev and stage, and maybe those are some subscriptions they have access to.
Correct, yeah.
But then maybe their environment, maybe there's PII data and everything else in there, and but they wouldn't release their updates there. They would go through the pipeline, release to production, and they just don't even have access to the production subscription.
Exactly.
Right at that point,
Yeah.
Maybe they've got PIM tools if they ever need to for some operational tasks, but releases would be through that.
Exactly. So the actual act of running the release in any of these tools, GitHub or DevOps, there's identities that tool, those products use to be able to reach out to different environments, and that's their access control boundary. So somebody has to approve that release. So some managerial set of individuals has to say, okay, we're ready to actually go, and then DevOps does this thing.
Very cool. So it sounds like you've got a lot of examples, Ryan.
Mm-hmm.
And I always went to you when I had questions, how could I think about ways in which this working? So what are some of the more interesting problems that you solved using this type of framework?
Yeah, so good question. I'll give you, actually, I kind of have a demo, and I'll just use it. There's a lot of different ways you can build pipelines in Azure DevOps and using YAML files, and I defer to using the what we call the classic mode just because it's graphical. So no rhyme or reason other than just easier to show and kind of highlight instead of looking at YAML. Yeah.
There's so much power in just a graphical UI for people still, I think, to understand what's going on, right?
Exactly. So and I'll walk through this a little bit more, but what this was for is a customer who had made some migrations of a public-facing platform they had into Azure App Services, which is, if you don't know, a receptacle we have to be able to host web applications. And that worked very well for them. But a component of that platform stack involved a number of, let's just call them compute VMs. And they were very large VMs, 64, actually they had some that were 96, 128. They were very large, beefy machines that needed to do some processing, some simulations behind the scenes. And the user would basically, the flow would go, user would interact with the web app to say, oh, well, I want to submit the simulation. That job would get submitted to a whole bunch of back-end machines that actually do that work. So the challenge with that is in the web app, in the Azure App Service world, is that those environments aren't really conducive to running. Well, first of all, we don't have an environment that has that many processors or that much RAM. And secondly, they're not really well suited for running very large compute jobs. So they needed to have a infrastructure as a service environment to deploy this into.
Okay.
Well, this brought forward some interesting elements. So this organization, like many organizations that you may work with, you have some internal requirements and kind of just call them politics and bureaucratic red tape around any situation where a server is involved has to fall under another team that has to be domain joined and has all kinds of other rigmarole that has to go through. Mm-hmm. So their goal, they came to me, was we really need a kind of a PaaS, platform as a service type manner, to deploy servers and basically treat them like cattle. We don't want them to be domain joined. We want them to be on an isolated network. The only thing that can access them is the web tier that actually submits jobs to them. And there's a queue in the middle that basically decouples that even. And they wanted to be able to deploy their software, which is a Windows service, onto N number of machines. And every month when we have, come after Patch Tuesday, when we update all of their VM images, they just wanted to flush them down the toilet and recreate a new environment and deploy their application to that. What we did is we used a solution in Azure called VM scale sets that actually allows you to create pools of VMs that are identical to one another. And this DevOps pipeline actually creates that VM scale set. So down here is actually, this is actually running an ARM template. The infrastructure as code template that actually builds out the VM scale set. So, all the VMs and in this isolated, disconnected virtual network that the machines sit in.
Okay.
And then it takes the prior elements are actually taking the application, the Windows service, packaging it up as a zip file, uploading that to an Azure storage account. I create a SAS token for the storage account. And then I pass in a bunch of variables to that ARM template. The name of the zip file, the storage account that it's in, and the storage account key. So this worked very well in a greenfield environment to deploy their application into, build out the infrastructure. And then what we did is we used another capability called desired state configuration. So once the machine boots up, there's an extension that is deployed onto that. So let's just think of that as a some capability that Azure allows you to sprinkle into that VM after it's deployed. And that desire state configuration allows us to basically run what amounts to some PowerShell script to actually tell the machine how to configure itself. And in our case, I can actually go and show you some of the code here. So
Why are you bringing that up? So on the left here, these are all the different services, just for people joining in, right? So you got boards, which is for planning, repos where you're storing all your code, right? That could be GitHub too, if we wanted to and pull from. But these are kind of all the Azure DevOps services, right? On the left.
Yeah, absolutely. So if I make it, so what this is actually is, let me scroll over here a little bit. So what this is a desire state configuration template, and I'm just going to kind of walk through the important bits. So you can actually see what this is actually doing is it's downloading the application from the storage account, and then it's removing the Windows service, and then adding, reinstalling using the .NET install util. The updated service. So this desire state configuration script works for servers that are brand new, that don't have anything installed. So it'll install this application on it, and it will also work on an environment that already exists. So when they want to update their service and actually deploy it to their application, they can actually do that without having to tear down the entire environment and redeploy it. So this actually worked in both ways.
Okay, so you're actually defining the config, the .NET framework. I saw like you had NVIDIA drivers there and stuff as well, right?
These were very high-end machines that had GPUs in them as well. So that was another requirement to be able to get the NVIDIA driver on there. So it did all of that as part of the deployment.
Okay, no, that makes sense. Yeah. And then you use DSC here, but if somebody wanted to use Puppet, Chef, Ansible,
those are all valid.
Pick your tool of choice, right?
Yeah.
So, okay, fantastic. Tell us more. Going back to the pipeline, so you've got and we were talking about this on a previous episode. You've got kind of pipelines, you've got releases. Mm-hmm. How do you sort of explain the difference to people? And I know there's kind of the more unified YAML pipeline that you were kind of referring to as well.
Sure. Yeah. So the pipeline, and I'll go to this other project as another talking point. So this this pipeline, and get my. Move that to the other screen here. So this pipeline is actually building my code. So this is a web application written in .NET Core. So this pipeline section of Azure DevOps is all of the tasks required to build my application. So I've got restoring all of the packages that my application has dependencies on, building it. Running a bunch of test automation against it, and then publishing the artifact into Azure DevOps to be accessible by things like release pipelines. And I have another task in here. Whitesource is a good partner of ours that is provides some ability to look at all of the packages that are used in your project, whether it be .NET, Java, whatever your application is written in. And it will help you in maintaining some levels of compliance. So like if there becomes a vulnerability in some jQuery library that I'm using as an example, it will to that or to my leadership, the project team, the development team to be able to help you keep better tabs on that. So I've got a task in here to be able to do that too.
Okay. And so all of this is like if you're in Visual Studio and you're doing your build, essentially is kind of this part of the process. Mimicking that, and then we go to releases when we want to push that out to the wild, right?
That is correct. Yep. So this project is actually another interesting demo that's not quite as complex as maybe I should have started with this one instead of the other. The other one was more of a real customer example, and this is just a simplified example. And I have a couple different release pipelines. So I'm going to start with this one, and this one is actually, I have a bunch of other tasks I was playing with. I use this to kind of test a bunch of things, but the reality is that this particular pipeline has one task in it. Take this application and deploy it to a Azure App Service. So this is the PaaS approach. Really, really simple. Just taking the output from my build and publishing that to an app service.
And is this actually deploying the app service, like actually deploying the infrastructure, and then you just link into the previous build pipeline? Is that correct? Whatever it spits out, and then we deploy it here. So
yep. So there's a connection here that I'm actually referencing the, and actually you can even see it in the pipeline. This is actually the artifacts from my build that I just showed you.
Okay.
So I call it drop. So.
Yeah, and I think this is great because when you sort of piece it together like this, back to your simple slide that you had there, it's kind of developers kind of build in applications, ops team or infrastructure teams that are kind of growing up into the DevOps world are kind of focused on how do I get this infrastructure out. I think it's a great way to start. Where would you tell somebody, maybe if they come in from an infrastructure background and they're building their very first pipeline, what would you advise them to try to do? Is there a task you'd say, like, is it build a VM? Is it, what is it? Is it build some other service out there?
Sure. So and actually this particular, so this is the same application. I just showed you the one that goes to app service, and this is actually deploying it to VMs. And this is where things get really interesting, I think, or powerful, I should say. I'm just going to open it. This has many more tasks in it. And instead, you see that there's no task here to deploy to an app service environment. This is deploying to VMs.
Okay.
And more specifically, it's deploying to VMs that have no connectivity to the internet. So these are on a private network. They happen to be in Azure, but they could just as easily been inside of a customer's environment.
Right.
So we have this concept. I'm going to go into my deployment group, and so you can see that I've got a couple VMs in this deployment group. These are the ones that I've been playing with more recently here. And we allow you to put agents onto those pieces of infrastructure. And there's the way you do that is just with a simple register. You can just pick whether or not you want to deploy it to a Windows machine or to a Linux machine.
Okay, and that's like an Azure DevOps agent then? So it's like registering it saying, hey, I'm available? Is that the concept? Okay.
Yep. And the cool thing about this is that, you think about all the different ways that you can do automation against infrastructure, like PowerShell remoting. I'll just use that as an example on Windows VMs. Probably wouldn't want to do that over, from an environment that's sitting on the internet to infrastructure that you have inside of your data center as a possibility. It's probably not a good idea to open up PowerShell remoting ports to the outside world. However, this agent is outbound only. So it talks on 443 out to Azure DevOps to be able to see if it has work that needs to be performed.
Okay. So
super firewall friendly. No need to worry about opening up ports and all the security ramifications that goes along with that. And now that you have an agent on some number of machines, you can instruct those machines to do things like configure themselves with worker pools and IS, or to, in this case, I'm actually telling them to, if I go back to the pipeline here, go to edit here.
Yeah, what I like about this is what you're saying there as you pull that up is these VMs are registered, and now we can just push whatever config we want down to them, right? Like App Team A could have this deployment group of VMs that they regularly push to. App Team B could have another group of VMs.
Exactly.
So Ryan, have you ever worked with customers that have these VMs on-prem? Because this design would also work in terms of on-prem, right? So the only thing they have to have would be some sort of site-to-site connectivity, correct?
Actually, they don't even need that. They just need to, the only requirement is 440 outbound. And some customers, work with some banks and some other highly regulated customers who don't have 443 outbound open, but they can selectively open it. So we tell you, we advertise, we have some documentation that highlights what ports need to be open. So it's just outbound only. Doesn't matter where those machines sit. Could sit in another cloud provider, on-prem in Azure. These machines happen to be in Azure. And with this deployment task, this kind of goes to Nick's comment about being able to deploy to different targeting different groups of machines. I had 3 machines that I have registered. You can see it's telling me only 2 of them will actually be deployed because I have a tag in here saying prod. And there's some interesting things you can do with this, where I have a customer who has thousands, literally thousands of machines for a product that they host, and they can do deployments saying, okay, we have this early release. We want to be able to get it to all the customers that are that are tagged as subscribing to our beta or early adopter ring, or to all the customers in Asia. So they can actually selectively target all of these machines and instruct them to pull down the latest build of their application, just by putting in different tags as part of their deployment.
Yeah, what I really like about this too is, a lot of times we end up in these DevOps conversations with people like, hey, do I need to deploy new infrastructure every single time? And, this is clear. Like the answer is, well, no, you can have deployment groups of VMs. We can have another pipeline like you just showed earlier that deploys VMs, deploys scale sets, deploys Azure App Service. And I kind of think, back to the question, like a lot of infrastructure teams, maybe like pick the top 3 services your app teams use and build the pipelines to build those. But then what I really like is this deployment group, because even things like Kubernetes infrastructure is popular today. Sometimes somebody needs new AKS infrastructure. Sometimes they need a new namespace, and we can kind of have different workflows for
Exactly.
both of those. So.
Yeah, and you can see I've got some chocolatey thing. And to your point on a new environment, if this is a new server, it wouldn't have .NET Core, wouldn't have the .NET Core hosting infrastructure on it. I'm configuring that. I'm also configuring the this will actually create my IS application pool. Okay. So if this wasn't there on that machine, it would configure it. And if it already was there, what I could actually do is, just as an example, if I wanted to change the identity of this app pool, if I reran this against my infrastructure, it would actually change the behavior of the app pools on all of, in this case, there's 2 servers, but this becomes much more powerful story if there's hundreds or thousands of machines instead of connecting every one, or building a PowerShell script that has to connect every machine, PowerShell remoting, or introducing whatever other dynamics that come up with remotely connecting the machine. And this way we can actually a job or command to have those machines pick up that work and say, okay, change your configuration.
I like
that.
Yeah,
this is awesome. Yeah, do you have another question there, Shannon?
No, I was going to say, so is that the biggest amount, like thousands of servers?
That's the biggest. It's in S thousands and growing. So their strategy is literally to put the agent on everything. So their application stack is, for similar reasons of the other customer I was talking about, where they have needs for high performance compute infrastructure. This customer also has similar needs to have higher end machines. That some financial work is actually being done on these servers. So you can't run in a traditional app service environment. So it has to be VMs, and then it gets because they're a software provider, they have some security guidelines and rails they have to work within that makes it such that it really impairs purposefully their operations team from being able to get access to your, maybe Shannon as a customer, to prevent them from getting into her subscription just arbitrarily. So DevOps solves that, because now they remove the barrier of having a person needing to do anything, or needing a person to have physical or logical access to that environment. And DevOps, and only DevOps, has access to those production environments, and that's the tool they use to be able to. So it's an interesting scenario, because they actually, a lot of customers tend to start with doing things manually and then automate. And in their case, it has to be automated. So if it cannot be done in Azure DevOps, they haven't found anything that can't be done in Azure DevOps. But just using that as an example, they have a forced function for their operations team that any operation they want to perform against their infrastructure has to go through here, even if it's an ad hoc thing.
Very cool. So now, did they have any sort of CICD tooling prior to Azure DevOps, or was this their first
They did not. Well, I guess I shouldn't say that, not entirely. So yes, they were using the kind of predecessor to DevOps, the Team Foundation server, um, to do source control and some of the other features we talked about on that little ring diagram I showed. But their automation, their deployment was all done through really hand-coded PowerShell scripts. They still use a lot of that PowerShell, but it's actually invoked from these DevOps pipelines that are actually running that PowerShell locally on all the machines. So they no longer need to have access to all these Active Directory tenants to be able to perform work. So then they still have a process if it's needed and necessary, but by and large they do all of their day-to-day actions through this.
Very cool.
Yeah, this is awesome. I think, I mean, this really helps piece it together for people that I think will getting started here.
Yep.
I guess to kind of wrap up here as we're coming up on time, any final thoughts, words of wisdom from your years of getting into the space and, to the point you're at now where, you've got white source and all these other plugins you're putting in here. And, for somebody who's just starting out to kind of get in where you are, like what have you seen, pitfalls to avoid, anything that you think is worth mentioning?
So I would suggest starting or thinking about the, automation first when it comes to deploying and configuring infrastructure to be able to support. And I'm going to use the word application generically. It doesn't have to be an application. My other example, it was a Windows service. So I mean that is kind of an application, but you can use tooling to be able to automate any aspect of your physical infrastructure, your physical or logical infrastructure. So I would definitely encourage the audience to start thinking about that. And then the white source, and I didn't really even dive into that, but that's actually I can pull up the report for this project because it does actually highlight a couple of packages that I'm using. It's kind of one of those do as I say, not as I do situations.
Happens. What are you talking about?
So I've got kind of an older Node.js package that I'm using that's got some vulnerabilities, and this is bringing forward that I was doing some static analysis on my
that's interesting
on my code, and telling me there's some very high and significant vulnerabilities in this particular version. So I mean, if I were a customer, I would, and this was an application that was, important other than just a simple demo, I would be pretty concerned about some of these vulnerabilities. But so this is a really, really powerful kind of pane of glass. You can see, these are significant vulnerabilities, and these are the ones that are orange are either medium vulnerabilities or things that maybe there's a vulnerability that I'm not actually invoking. So like if I'm calling an API or using an API, it will actually tell me, okay, there is a vulnerability in this version that you're using, but your code isn't impacted by it. So it actually gets down to that level of scrutiny in your application.
I think we might have to have a follow-up one day on DevOps vulnerability management during builds. It's probably a whole topic in itself, right?
Absolutely.
So,
yeah. This is a pretty powerful capability.
Cool. Well, thank you for sharing your screen and walking us through all that. Shannon, any other thoughts from your side before we kind of wrap up?
Yeah, thanks for taking the time. I know that's always the hard thing, right? Is trying to find the time, trying to make sure you've got the time. So we definitely appreciate that, Ryan.
Yeah, no problem. Happy to help.
Yeah, so with that, thank you, Ryan. Appreciate you coming on the show. Shannon, thank you as always. And to all our viewers out there, I hope you continue to enjoy these episodes. And I think this one, if you haven't tried Azure DevOps yet, based on the last 3 years, we've been introducing you to the people culture side of things. This is where you can actually start to see some of that automation come to light. So again, Ryan, thank you again so much. This was awesome. And Shannon, thank you as always. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, everyone.